Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you, honey. My father cut me off that night for a single word disrespect. He froze my cards and my trust fund, smiling as if he had erased my existence with a snap of his fingers. But he forgot that the person kicked away from the tablet often learns how to buy the table itself. 6 months later, I walked into the boardroom with a buyout offer that ended his control for good. My name is Holly James, though for 27 years the world knew me as Holly Waverly. I stood in the cracked asphalt of the executive parking lot, the soles of my shoes absorbing the biting chill of a damp November morning in Crown Falls, Illinois. The wind here always tasted like iron and wet concrete, a flavor that used to comfort me. It was the taste of industry, of legacy, of the empire my grandfather built from a single forge. Now it just tasted like rejection. I looked up at the signage looming over the main entrance. Waverly Tull and Forge. The letters were steel brushed to a matte finish bolted into the red brick facade that had stood since 1952. I used to look at that building and see my future. I saw the office on the third floor where I analyzed supply chains. I saw the factory floor where I knew the shift supervisors by their first names. Today, I was looking at a fortress that had raised its drawbridge. I checked my watch. It was 6:45 in the morning. The first shift was just clocking in. I was not here to work. I was here to look at the wreckage of my life one last time before I started the long, humiliating process of rebuilding it from scrap. It had been 48 hours since the dinner. The memory did not drift in like a haze. It hit me with the violence of a car crash. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in the mahogany-paneled dining room of my father's estate. It was supposed to be a family dinner. That was the lie Graham Waverly told himself to feel human. In reality, every meal with my father was an informal board meeting where the mashed potatoes were served with a side of performance review. There were 8 of us at the table. My stepmother, terrified to make a sound that might interrupt him. My half-brother, who was too busy spending his allowance to care about the business, the CFO, who was practically a piece of furniture, and Caleb Knox. Caleb was the new addition. He was a restructuring consultant brought in from Chicago, a man who wore $3,000 suits and smiled like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He sat to my father's right, a position that used to be mine. My father was cutting into his steak, the knife screeching slightly against the china. That sound was the only thing audible in the room until he spoke. "The third quarter projections are soft," Graham said, not looking up. "We need to tighten the belt before the shareholder meeting in January. I am looking at the personnel overhead." I stiffened. I knew what that meant. I had seen the memos Caleb had been sliding across my father's desk for weeks. "We are already running lean, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "The floor is understaffed as it is. Overtime is up 20% because we haven't hired to replace the retirees." Graham stopped cutting. He did not look at me. He took a sip of his wine, a heavy Cabernet that cost more than most of our line workers made in a week. "Caleb suggests we cap the health savings match. Graham said it saves the company 4% on the bottom line immediately. It makes the EPTA look very attractive for the refinancing package." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. That is their health care. "Dad, we have guys on the floor who have been breathing metal dust for 30 years. You cut that match, and you are effectively cutting their pay during a period of high inflation. It is predatory." The room went dead silent. My stepmother lowered her fork. The CFO stared intently at the centerpiece. Graham finally looked at me. His eyes were the same shade of gray as the steel we manufactured, and just as hard. "Predatory," he repeated, tasting the word. "I am trying to save this company, and you call me predatory." "I am calling it short-sighted," I insisted, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "You are stripping the assets that make this company run people just to make a spreadsheet look pretty for a bank loan. It is bad business." Graham placed his knife and fork down with a deliberate, terrifying calmness. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and threw it onto the table. "You have become very comfortable, Holly," he said. His voice was not loud. It was a low rumble, the sound of a machine before it engages a gear. "You sit in the office I gave you. You drive the car I leased for you. You live in the condo I pay for. And you sit at my table and question my judgment in front of a consultant I hired to save us from ruin. I am the VP of Operations. I said, it is my job to question bad strategy. It is your job to listen. Graham slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. It is your job to learn, but you do not want to learn. You want to lecture. You think because you went to business school, you know more than the man who built the roof over your head. I think you are losing touch. I said I should have stopped. I knew I should have stopped. But the injustice of it, the image of the workers, I saw every day being squeezed so my father could boast about profit margins pushed me over the edge. You are listening to him. I pointed a trembling finger at Caleb. Instead of the people who actually build your product, Graham's face turned a dark shade of violet. He stood up. He was a tall man, imposing, taking up all the air in the room. Disrespect, he hissed. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Excuse me, I asked. I said disrespect. Graham roared. That is all I get from you. Ungrateful, arrogant, disrespect. He turned to the CFO, who was shrinking into his chair. Cut her, Graham commanded. The CFO blinked. Sir, you heard me. Cut her access now tonight. Revoke her login, deactivate her badge, call it, and tell them to wipe her remote access immediately. Dad, stop, I said, standing up. We can discuss this. There is nothing to discuss, Graham said, buttoning his jacket as if the dinner was formally over. You think you are so smart. You think you can run things better? Let us see how you run your own life without the Waverly cushion under you. He pointed a finger at my face. From this moment, you are not a Waverly. You are an employee who was terminated for insubordination, and you are a daughter who has been disowned for disrespect. I looked around the table. My stepmother looked away. My brother was checking his phone under the table, oblivious or indifferent. And then I looked at Caleb Knox. He was not looking away. He was watching me with a faint, amused smile. He took a sip of water, his eyes locking with mine. It was a look of pure triumph. He had known exactly which buttons to push to make Graham explode. He had orchestrated this. He needed me out of the way, so he could strip the company down to its bones and sell it for parts. I felt a sting of tears, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I would not cry, not in front of Caleb, not in front of the father who was treating me like a defective part on an assembly line. I straightened my spine. I picked up my purse. I am not asking for anything, I said, my voice shaking only slightly. Keep the money. Keep the job. But I want you to remember this moment. Dad, I just want you to stop hurting people, to feel strong, because eventually there will be no one left to hurt. Graham let out a cold, dismissive laugh. Get out of my house. Go see how the real world treats people with zero capital and zero connections. Lie on your own, Ben. I turned and walked out. I did not run. I walked. I heard the heavy oak door slam shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I got into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely find the ignition button. I drove for 20 minutes before I had to pull over because my vision was blurring. That was when the notification started. First, it was my work email on my phone. Account action required. Your session has expired. I tried to log in. Access denied. User account disabled by administrator. Then the banking app notification. I tapped it. My checking account, which I used for groceries and gas, was joint linked to the family office for accounting convenience, as my father had always insisted. Status frozen. Available balance $0 and 0. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the interior of my car. He had moved faster than I thought possible. He hadn't just fired me. He was trying to strangle me. I sat there in the dark, the rain beginning to drum against the roof. I had $300 in cash in my wallet. I had half a tank of gas, and I had the clothes on my back. But the final blow came a moment later. A text message from the private wealth management firm that handled the Waverly Family Trust, the trust my mother had set up for me before she died, the trust that was supposed to be untouchable until I turned 30. I opened the message notification of amendment. The beneficiary status of the Holly Waverly Revocable Trust has been modified per The guarantor's instructions. Current beneficiary access has been suspended pending legal review. He had found a loophole. He always found a loophole. I looked back up at the Waverly Tool and Forge sign in the present day. The morning shift whistle blew, a long mournful sound that signaled the start of the grind. I watched the workers filing, and men and women I had fought for. Men and women whose benefits were about to be slashed so my father could buy a few more months of prestige. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a reminder for a credit card payment I could no longer make. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold metallic air. Graham Waverly thought he had deleted me. He thought that by taking my name and my money, he had taken my power. He was wrong. He had just given me the most dangerous thing in the world. Nothing to lose. I turned my back on the factory, got into my car, and drove away. I was not Holly Waverly anymore. That girl died at the dinner table. I was Holly James, and I had a lot of work to do. The unraveling of my life did not happen with a scream or an explosion. It happened with the soft digital chirp of an electronic lock turning red. I arrived at my apartment building in downtown Crown Falls 20 minutes after leaving the company parking lot. It was a sleek glass-fronted building where the rent was $3,500 a month. I had lived there for 3 years. The doorman, a kind older man named Henry, usually tipped his hat to me. Today he was not at the desk. I pressed my fob against the sensor of the main entrance. It blinked red. I tried it again. A moment later, the heavy glass door was pushed open from the inside. But not for me. It was the building manager, a woman named Sheeler, who always sent me Christmas cards praising my punctuality with rent. She did not look like she wanted to send me a card today. She looked pained, clutching a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "M. Waverly," she said. Her voice was tight. "I am so sorry. We received a notification from the bank regarding the automatic transfer for this month and the lease guarantee." "The lease is in my name, Sheeler," I said, though I already knew the answer. The lease was in my name, but the guarantor, the financial backbone that allowed a 20-some to rent a penthouse suite, was Waverly Holdings. The guarantor withdrew the security deposit and canceled the standing payment order 2 hours ago, she said, reciting the legal reality. "Under the terms of your lease, without a valid guarantor or 6 months of rent paid in advance, we have to initiate a lockout. The system does it automatically. 6 months of rent. That was $21,000. I had $300 in my wallet. How long do I have?" I asked. "Technically, the lock is already engaged," she said, looking down at her shoes. "But I can give you a 48-hour maintenance pass. You can get your things. After that, we have to list the unit. 48 hours. That was how long it took to erase a lifestyle. The next 2 days were a blur of cardboard and packing tape. I did not have money for movers, so I sold my designer handbags to a consignment shop downtown for pennies on the dollar just to rent a U-Haul truck and a storage unit on the outskirts of town. I packed my life into brown boxes. The clothes, the books, the expensive espresso machine I had never learned to use properly. Every time I took a break, I picked up my phone. I dialed my father's personal cell. It rang 4 times, then clicked to voicemail. "You have reached Graham Waverly. Leave a message, Dad," I said into the receiver sitting on the floor of an empty living room. "I am not calling to beg. I just want to know if this is really how you want to do this. You are not just hurting me. You are erasing me." I hung up. I waited 10 minutes and called my stepmother. The line did not even ring. It gave a sharp 3-tone error sound followed by a robotic voice telling me the customer was unavailable, blocked. I was not just cut off financially. I was digitally quarantined from the family. The only lifeline I received came on the second night while I was taping up the last box of kitchenware. My phone buzzed with a message from an unlisted number. I knew who it was immediately by the syntax. "Please be careful. He is scrubbing the servers. HR files are being moved to external drives. He is cleaning house." It was Mara, the head of human resources. She had been at Waverly Tool and Forge for 20 years. She used to give me peppermints when I waited in the lobby after school. Now she was risking her pension just to send me a text. I replied, "Thank you, Mara. Keep your head down." I slept that night in a motel off the interstate that cost $59 a night. The sheet smelled of bleach and stale cigarette smoke. I stared at the water stains on the ceiling, realizing that for the first time in my life, I was entirely, terrifyingly anonymous. The next week was a lesson in humility. I needed a job. I had a Master of Business Administration. I had 5 years of experience as a Vice President of Operations. On paper, I was a catch. In Crown Falls, I was radioactive. I sat in an interview at a logistics firm 3 towns over. The hiring manager was a man named David who had played golf with my father. He spent the first 10 minutes looking at my resume and the next 20 minutes looking at the door, as if he expected Graham Waverly to burst in and fire him just for speaking to me. "It is an impressive resume, Holly," David said, sliding the paper back across the desk. "But we do a lot of business with Waverly Tool, a lot of shipping contracts. I am a separate entity from my father." "David," I said, trying to project confidence. "My skills are my own in this town," he said, offering a sympathetic but final grimace. "Names carry weight, and right now your name carries a lot of complexity. I cannot risk the contract." It happened 3 more times. The name Waverly, which had once opened every door in Illinois, was now bolting them shut. I was overqualified for entry-level jobs and too toxic for management roles. By the end of the second week, I was eating instant noodles and watching my cash reserves dwindle to double digits. I stopped applying for executive roles. I stripped Waverly off the top of my resume and just wrote Holly James using my middle name as my surname. That was how I ended up at Redwood Compliance. Redwood was a small audit and regulatory firm tucked away in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. The carpet was a depressing shade of gray. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, and the coffee in the break room tasted like battery acid. They did not care who my father was. They only cared that I knew how to read a balance sheet and that I was willing to work for $22 an hour. The job is mostly data entry and compliance checks. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Karen, told me it is boring. It is repetitive, but it pays every 2 weeks. "I will take it," I said. And just like that, the eyes to the Waverly manufacturing empire became a junior compliance clerk. I spent my days in a cubicle cross-referencing tax codes and municipal safety regulations. It was mind-numbing work, but it gave me access to something I desperately needed: a quiet place to think and a computer terminal with subscriptions to public record databases. One rainy Tuesday, about 3 weeks into the job, I stayed late. The office was empty. I was supposed to be finishing a compliance report for a dental supply company, but my mind was drifting back to the legal wreckage of my departure. I needed to see exactly what I had signed. I logged into my personal cloud storage. I had always been meticulous about backing up my personal documents, a habit my father had ironically instilled in me. I found the folder labeled Employment Waverly. I opened the PDF of my original employment contract. It was dated 5 years ago, signed the day I officially joined the company after grad school. I remembered that day. My father had handed me the pen with a beaming smile, and I had signed it without reading past the salary figure. I had trusted him. I scrolled through the legalese, standard non-compete clauses, confidentiality agreements, intellectual property assignments. It all looked standard. Then I reached the addendums. There was a section on the last page buried under a paragraph about stock options. It was titled Appendix B, Equity Vesting and Buy-Sell Provisions for Family Members. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. In the event of involuntary termination of a class of family member shareholder, that was me. The shareholder retains the right to a prioritized buyback of controlling interest if the company's debt to equity ratio exceeds 4:1 for 3 consecutive quarters. I froze. I read it again. It was a safety valve. My grandfather must have insisted on it years ago to prevent the family from losing the company to banks if one generation got reckless. If the company was drowning in debt and they fired a family member, the family member had a legal right to step in and buy back the company at a formula-determined price to preserve the lineage. I had signed it. My father had signed it. But the clause only mattered if the debt-to-equity ratio was disastrous. Waverley Tool and Forge was supposed to be healthy. My father always bragged about our liquidity. My heart started to pound. I opened a new tab. I pulled up the public records for Waverley Tool and Forge. As a private company, they did not have to publish everything, but they had to file uniform commercial code statements for secured loans. I searched for Waverley Tool. The screen filled with results. Secured loan equipment lien. That was normal. Manufacturing was capital intensive. Then I saw the filings from 6 months ago. There were 3 new liens against the company assets, but that was not what made my stomach drop. I switched to my old personal email archives. I searched for loan guarantee anything. I found a thread from 2 years ago. My father had CC'd me on a document regarding the refinancing of the main plant. He had probably done it by accident, mistaking my email for the CFO's. I opened the attachment. It was a personal financial statement for Graham Waverley. I looked at the numbers and the breath left my lungs. He was not just rich. He was leveraged to the hilt. He had borrowed against his personal real estate. He had borrowed against his future stock dividends. He had taken out personal loans to inject cash into the company to make the quarterly reports look good. The profit he boasted about at dinner parties was an illusion. He was propping up the company with personal debt to maintain the appearance of success. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and he was using the workers' benefits like the health savings match he had just cut to service the interest on his own bad decisions. I sat back in the cheap office chair, the hum of the fluorescent light suddenly deafening. It all made sense. The anger, the desperation, the influence of Caleb Knox. Caleb wasn't just a consultant. He was a vulture. He knew he must have seen the books and realized my father was drowning. Caleb was cutting costs not to save the company for the long term, but to squeeze out enough cash to pay off the creditors before the house of cards collapsed. And my father. He had cut me off not because I was disrespectful. That was just the excuse. He had cut me off because I was the only one asking questions. I was the one pointing out the cracks in the hull. He needed total obedience because he was terrified. He was walking a tightrope over a pit of debt, and he needed everyone to shut up and hold their breath. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was a frightened man trying to keep up appearances while the water rose around his neck. I looked at the buy-sell clause again. Prioritized buyback. If debt-to-equity ratio exceeds, I pulled out a notepad and did the math. Based on the liens I saw and the revenue drop he had admitted to at dinner, the ratio was climbing. He was close. He was so incredibly close to the trigger point. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. For the last 2 weeks, I had been mourning the loss of a father. I had been waiting for him to call, to apologize, to tell me it was a mistake. I had wanted him to say he loved me more than his pride. But looking at those numbers, I realized something cold and hard. He didn't own the table anymore. The bank did. I closed the laptop. I picked up my purse. I walked out of Redwood Compliance into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The street lights reflected in the puddles on the asphalt. I did not feel like crying anymore. The knot of grief in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I did not need their apology. Apologies were words, and words were cheap. My father had taught me that I needed to stop them. I needed to wait. I needed to watch. And when the numbers aligned, when he inevitably tripped over his own ego and violated the covenants of those massive loans, I needed to be ready. I got into my used sedan and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 9:15. I wasn't Holly Waverley, the victim. I was Holly James, the compliance clerk, and I had just found the weapon that would bring the king to his knees. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty car. "You want to play by the numbers. Let us play." I put the car in gear and drove home to my empty apartment. I had a lot of reading to do. The public library in Crown Falls became my war room. It was the only place where the internet was high speed, free, and, most importantly, anonymous. I sat at a corner terminal surrounded by students, studying for midterms and retirees reading newspapers, while I dismantled my father's empire piece by digital piece. I was no longer looking for a job. I was looking for a leverage point. I started with the boring stuff. Most people think corporate scandals are found in secret recordings or dramatic confessions. They are not. They are buried in the footnotes of PDF files that nobody bothers to read. I spent 3 days combing through the municipal procurement portal of Crown Falls. Waverly Tool and Forge was not just a private manufacturer. We were a primary supplier for the city. We made the manhole covers, the storm drain grates, and the specialized brackets for the traffic light assemblies. I found the current contract. It was a massive document, 150 pages of bureaucratic text signed 18 months ago. I scrolled until my eyes watered, looking for the termination clauses. And there it was. Section 14, Paragraph C, the Morality and Ethical Standing Clause. The city reserves the right to terminate this agreement immediately if the vendor or its principal officers are found to be in violation of labor laws, engaged in financial malfeasance, or involved in public scandals that could damage the reputation of the municipality. I leaned back in the hard wooden chair. This contract represented roughly 40% of Waverly's guaranteed annual revenue. It was the anchor that kept the ship steady. If the city pulled this contract, the cash flow would dry up within 30 days. And if the cash flow dried up, the loan covenants, the ones I had discovered in my previous late-night session, would snap shut like a bear trap. My father was standing on a trap door, and he did not even know he had handed me the lever. But I needed more than just a clause. I needed a violation. I took a break and walked to the lobby to get a drink of water. A local news station was playing on a mounted television near the checkout desk. I froze. There was Caleb Knox. He was standing on the steps of the Waverly Administration Building, wearing a navy suit that fit him too perfectly. A reporter was shoving a microphone in his face. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Waverly Family Dispute Restructuring Officer Speaks." "We are all very concerned for Holly," Caleb was saying, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. "Restructuring a legacy company is always difficult, and sometimes the pressure causes cracks in the family dynamic. Holly is unstable right now." She lashed out at her father. "She abandoned her post, and we just hoped she gets the help she needs. We are focused on saving jobs here." Unstable abandoned her post. He was controlling the narrative. He was painting me as the erratic daughter who couldn't handle the heat. While he positioned himself as the savior of the working man, it was a brilliant, disgusting move. By discrediting me publicly, he ensured that if I ever tried to speak out, it would look like the ramblings of a bitter, disowned child. I watched him smile at the camera, a shark in human skin. I did not feel the urge to scream. I did not feel the urge to call the station and defend myself. That is what the old Holly would have done. The new Holly just took a sip of lukewarm water and memorized the time of the broadcast. He wanted a villain, fine. But he was forgetting that villains are usually the ones who do the homework. I needed proof that the restructuring was a lie. I needed to prove that the pain being inflicted on the workers wasn't necessary for survival, but a choice made to cover up greed. I went to my car and drove to a prepaid phone store. I bought a cheap burner phone with cash. I sat in the parking lot and texted Mara. "Is aisle 9, the supermarket on 4th, 20 minutes. Bring the timeline." I did not wait for a reply. I drove to the grocery store. I grabbed a cart and walked to the cereal aisle. Aisle 9. I pretended to read the nutrition label on a box of bran flakes. 10 minutes later, Mara appeared. She looked tired. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and she was clutching her purse tight against her side. She parked her cart next to mine. She didn't look at me. She looked at the shelf. "They are auditing everyone's emails," she whispered, picking up a box of oatmeal. "Caleb fired the IT director yesterday, brought in his own guys. They are scrubbing everything. Did you get it?" I asked, my voice low. Mara slid a folded piece of paper from under her purse into my cart, right between two boxes of cereal. "This is the internal memo regarding the suspension of the health savings match," she said. "And the second page is the notification from Parole about the executive bonus pool being reallocated. Thank you, Mara. You need to distance yourself from me now. Delete my number." "Holly," she said, her voice trembling. "He is gutting the pension fund next." I heard them talking in the conference room. They are going to switch the defined benefit plan to a 401k with no match. You have to stop him." "I will." I said go. She walked away. I waited 2 minutes, paid for my cereal with cash, and left. Back in my car, I unfolded the paper. The memo announcing the cut to the workers' health benefits was dated October 14th. I pulled out the notebook where I had written down the details of my father's personal loan documents, the ones I had found in my email archives. The date on the personal loan agreement where Graham Waverly borrowed $5 million against his personal assets to inject into the company was also October 14th. It was not a coincidence. My father had not cut benefits because the company was failing. He had cut benefits to free up cash flow on the exact same day he took on massive personal debt. He was effectively taking money out of the workers' pockets to pay the interest on a loan he used to keep his own chair at the head of the table. He was using the employee's livelihood to service his own ego. This was it. This was the financial malfeasance the city contract warned about. If I showed this to a judge, it might be a civil dispute. But if I showed this to the city council, it was a political hand grenade. But I wasn't ready to pull the pin yet. I needed to own the explosion. I drove back to my small apartment. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Secretary of State's business registration portal. I filled out the forms. Name of entity Holly James Holdings, LLC. I used my middle name. No Waverly, just James. It sounded like a shell company. It sounded boring. It sounded like nothing. I paid the filing fee with the last of my savings. Now I had a vehicle. I needed an engine. The next morning, I put on the only suit I had kept, a charcoal gray blazer and trousers. I tied my hair back. I walked into the office of the Firefighters and Municipal Workers Pension Fund. This fund held a significant amount of local debt. They were conservative investors. They hated risk, and I knew from my days reviewing the books that they held a piece of the syndicated loan that Waverly operated on. I asked to see Mr. Abernathy. He was an old friend of my grandfather's, a man who still believed in handshakes and hard numbers. He looked surprised to see me. "Polly," he said, gesturing to a chair, "I saw the news. Your father—" "Well, Khaled Knox says things are complicated. Things are very simple. Mr. Abernathy," I said, sitting down. I placed a folder on his desk. It contained nothing but public records and the timeline I had constructed. "My father is leveraged at 5:1. He is using personal debt to cover operational losses, and he has triggered a potential default on the city contract by violating the ethics clause." Abernathy's eyebrows shot up. He opened the folder. He read the summary I had typed up. "If the city contract goes," I said calmly, "the company defaults on its primary loans within a quarter. Your fund holds $2 million of that paper. If Waverly goes under, you are looking at a total write-off." Abernathy took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Why are you telling me this? You want me to call the loan?" "No," I said, "banks hate calling loans. It is messy. It involves lawyers and bankruptcy courts. Banks prefer to sell bad debt to someone else and take a small loss just to get it off their books." I leaned forward. "I want you to know that there is a buyer in the market. A quiet buyer. Holly James Holdings, LLC. If your credit committee decides that the Waverly paper is too toxic to hold, this entity is willing to buy the debt note at 80 cents on the dollar." Abernathy looked at me. Really looked at me. He saw the fatigue in my eyes, but he also saw the steel. "You do not have the capital to buy $2 million of debt, Holly," he said softly. "Not yet," I admitted. "But I have the structure, and I know the bank that holds the primary mortgage is even more scared than you are. I am going to see them next. If I get the primary holder to agree to a transfer of rights, the smaller holders like you will follow. You are betting against your own inheritance," he said. "There is no inheritance left, Mr. Abernathy. There is only a carcass that Khaled Knox is picking clean. I am trying to buy the bones so I can rebuild the body." Abernathy looked down at the papers again. He saw the risk. He saw the inevitable crash. "If you can secure the financing," he said slowly, "I will recommend to the committee that we offload the asset. We have a fiduciary duty to our pensioners." We cannot hold on to a sinking ship just for old times' sake. Thank you, I said. I walked out of his office. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. I went to the nearest bank branch not to withdraw money, but to deposit a check from Redwood Compliance for $800. I stood in line looking at the people around me. They were buying groceries, paying bills, worrying about gas prices. I was done worrying. I wasn't buying a new apartment. I wasn't buying a car. I wasn't buying clothes to replace the ones I had lost. I was buying paper. I was buying debt. I was buying the invisible chains that bound my father to his throne. I took the deposit slip. I looked at the balance. It was small, but it was the C. I had the LOC. I had the knowledge of the breach. And now I had the first crack in the wall of their financial defense. I walked out into the sunlight for the first time in weeks. The air didn't taste like iron. It tasted like opportunity. My father had 6 months to run his game. I just needed one day to end it. The summons arrived exactly 6 weeks, 2 days, and 4 hours after I had been exiled from the family kingdom. It did not come via a text message or a phone call. It arrived in the form of a heavy cream-colored envelope delivered by a courier service to my mailbox at the Redwood Compliance office. The return address was embossed, "The office of Graham Waverley." My hands did not shake as I opened it. 6 weeks ago, I would have torn it open with a desperate hope that my father had come to his senses. I would have looked for an apology. I would have looked for love. The Holly who worked in a cubicle under fluorescent lights. The Holly who ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and spent her nights decoding municipal bond covenants was not looking for love. I was looking for a signature. The letter was brief. It was an invitation to a family mediation at the estate. The language was carefully constructed to sound benevolent, using words like reconciliation, path forward, and closure. I knew exactly what it was. It was not a peace treaty. It was a surrender ceremony. I drove my used sedan up the winding driveway of the Waverley estate on a Tuesday evening. The landscaping was impeccable, the hedges trimmed to geometric perfection. The house looked like a castle made of brick and ivy, glowing warmly against the twilight. It was a beautiful lie. Inside, the foundation was rotting, eating itself alive with debt to keep the exterior looking exactly like this. I parked my car next to Khaled Knox's Porsche. The juxtaposition made me smile, a grim, tight expression that didn't reach my eyes. The housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, opened the door. She looked at me with sad, watery eyes and whispered that they were waiting in the library. I wanted to hug her to tell her that I was going to save her pension fund, but I just nodded and walked past her. The library was my father's sanctuary. It smelled of old paper, leather, and expensive scotch. Graham sat in his high-backed wing chair by the fireplace. He looked tired. The shadows under his eyes were deep, and for a second I felt a pang of pity, but then I saw Khaled Knox leaning against the mantel, nursing a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, and the pity evaporated. "Holly," my father said. He did not stand up. "Thank you for coming. You sent a courier to my job." "Dad," I said, remaining standing. It didn't feel optional. "Sit down, please," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. The child's chair, the one that was slightly lower than his, forcing anyone who sat in it to look up at him. It was a power dynamic he had engineered years ago. I sat. I crossed my legs and placed my purse on my lap. I waited. "We have been worried about you," Graham began, his voice dropping into that smooth baritone register he used for shareholders' meetings. "This separation, it is not good for the family. It is not good for the company image." "I imagine it is not," I said neutrally, especially with the rumors circulating about the city contract. Caleb flinched, just a tiny twitch of his jaw muscle. But I caught it. They knew about the rumors. They didn't know I was the one who had whispered them to the wind. "Exactly," Khaled said, stepping forward. He placed his drink on a coaster. "Holly, look, we all said things we regret. Your father is under a lot of pressure. You know how he gets, but he wants you back in the fold. Not at the company, not yet, but as a daughter." He picked up a thick leather folder from the desk and held it out to me. "We have drawn up a settlement," Khaled said. "A way to give you a fresh start, a safety net so you don't have to work at that, whatever that place is. I took the folder, I opened it. It was 30 pages of dense legal text. I skipped the preamble and went straight to the terms. It was an offer to purchase my Class B preferred shares, the non-voting stock my mother had left me. The price listed was insulting. It was roughly 40% of their face value, but the real poison was in the attached clauses. Clause 7, non-disparagement and non-compete. If I signed, I could never speak about the company's internal operations. I could never work for a competitor or a vendor within 500 m. Clause 9, total waiver of claims. By signing, I would forfeit any right to sue for wrongful termination or audit the family trust. It is a generous offer, my father said, watching my face. Enough to buy a nice house, start a small business, a boutique, maybe something manageable. He was trying to buy my silence. He needed those shares back because if I held them, I technically had a right to see the annual financial reports. He needed me gone fully and legally before the end of the fiscal year. You want me to sell my birthright for pennies, I said, looking up from the paper. We want to secure your future, Caleb corrected smoothly. And frankly, Hully, the company isn't as liquid as it used to be. This is the best cash offer you're going to get. If the market turns, those shares could be worth zero. He was almost telling the truth, but for the wrong reasons. I flipped to the back of the agreement, and there it was, the mechanism of the sale. They had structured it as a voluntary private redemption, a simple exchange of cash for stock between family members. But my mind flashed back to the document I had found in my cloud storage 3 weeks ago, the buy-sell trigger in the original corporate charter. According to the addendum I had memorized, if a family member was forced to divest their shares, meaning if the sale was not voluntary but a condition of separation, the valuation of the company had to be performed by an independent third party. And more importantly, if the independent valuation proved that the company's debt-to-equity ratio was above the safety threshold, which I knew it was, the selling shareholder had the right of first refusal to purchase the voting shares of the majority holder to stabilize the asset. It was a paradox, a trap my grandfather had built to stop a reckless heir from gutting the company. If the company was healthy, the dad could buy out the kid. But if the company was sick, if it was drowning in debt, the kid had the right to buy out the dad to save the ship. Caleb didn't know about the addendum. He was too new. He had only read the current bylaws. He hadn't gone back to the 1980s charter where the family protective covenant was buried. I looked at Graham. He was watching me with a mixture of expectation and annoyance. "Dad," I said softly, "are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to play by the papers?" Graham let out a short, sharp laugh. "The papers, Hully. Papers are what you know best. You love rules. You love procedure. Well, here is the procedure. Sign the deal. Take the check, and let us be a family again at Christmas." "If I sign this," I said, tapping the document, "I am admitting that I am being forced out. You are making this a condition of our relationship." "Call it what you want," Graham said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just sign it. Stop being difficult. It is disrespectful." There was that word again. Disrespectful. It was the key that turned the lock in my heart. "Okay," I said. "I will sign." Caleb smiled. It was the smile of a man who thought he had just closed a deal. He handed me a gold fountain pen. I turned to the signature page. I did not sign the line marked "Agree to voluntary redemption." Instead, I took the pen and drew a firm line through that paragraph. I moved my hand down to the section labeled Statement of Involuntary Separation and Request for Formal Adjudication. It was a standard boilerplate section at the bottom of most legal settlements, usually ignored. It meant I am taking the money, but I am noting for the record that I am doing so under duress and require the transaction to be recorded in the corporate minutes. I signed my name there, Hully James. By signing that specific line, I wasn't just taking the money. I was officially categorizing the transaction as a hostile divestiture, and a hostile divestiture under the old charter automatically triggered the family protective covenant. I closed the folder. I didn't hand it to Calla. I placed it gently on the desk in front of my father. "There," I said, "it is done. I have agreed to your terms of separation." Caleb reached for the folder. Checking the signature, he saw my name. He didn't notice which line I had signed. He didn't care. He just saw ink on paper. Good, Khaled said, exhaling. Smart choice, Holly. When do I get the check? I asked. Funds will be wired in 3 business days. Khaled said. Once we file the stock transfer. Perfect, I said. I stood up. My legs felt light. The air in the room seemed to vibrate. Dad, I said. Graham looked at me. He was already pouring himself another drink. He looked relieved. He thought he had won. He thought he had just bought his freedom from my judgment. But, he asked, swirling the scotch. I hope the report looks good, I said. What report? The quarterly, I said. I really do. I turned and walked to the door. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel Khaled's smug satisfaction radiating like heat. They had no idea. By filing that stock transfer with my signature on the involuntary line, they were about to legally mandate an external audit of the company's debt. And once that audit hit the books, the debt ratio I had discovered would be official record, and then the clause would activate. I would not be the one selling. I would be the one with the legal right to buy. I walked out of the house and into the cool night air. The stars were bright above the Crown Falls skyline. I got into my car. I waited until I was past the iron gates before I pulled over to the side of the road. I pulled out my phone. I typed a message to the lawyer I had hired on a contingency fee, a shark I had found who hated Khaled Knox more than I did. It is signed. I executed the involuntary separation clause. They are filing the transfer on Friday. I watched the message send. Then I typed one more line. Now we just wait for him to pull the lever. I dropped the phone in the passenger seat and drove away. My father thought he had just cut me out of the will. In reality, he had just signed the death warrant for his own reign. He had handed me the gun, loaded it, and pointed it at his own foot. All I had to do was wait for him to pull the trigger. Silence was not just a strategy. It was a shroud. For the 3 weeks following the signing of the settlement agreement, I vanished. I did not post on social media. I did not return calls from the few friends who were brave enough to reach out to the outside world, and specifically to the residents of the Waverley estate. I was a defeated woman licking her wounds in a cheap apartment, presumably crying over a pint of ice cream. I wanted them to believe that. I needed them to believe that. My reality was starkly different. I was living in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage from the neighbor's unit. I drove my sedan until the check engine light became a permanent fixture on the dashboard. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and dinner. I saved every single penny, but while I lived like a pauper, I was thinking like a predator. The check for my shares, the settlement money Graham and Khaled had been so eager to push on me had cleared. It was a significant sum, enough to live comfortably for a few years, but I did not touch it. I did not buy a new dress or a better car. I moved the entire amount into the corporate account of Holly James Holdings, LLC. Then I went shopping, but I was not shopping for shoes. I was shopping for my father's anxiety. I knew that Graham Waverley had a weakness for local prestige. He liked to bank with institutions where the branch manager knew his name and offered him coffee in a porcelain cup. He used the First State Bank of Crown Falls for his personal lines of credit. It was a regional bank, conservative and currently overexposed to the manufacturing sector. I made an appointment with the vice president of commercial lending, a man named Arthur Pye. I did not go as Holly Waverley. I went as the managing partner of a private investment vehicle. I wore my one good suit. I pulled my hair back tight. I carried a briefcase that contained nothing but risk assessments I had printed at Redwood Compliance. Arthur Pym looked tired. He was a man who had spent 30 years approving loans on handshakes, and now the modern economy was eating him alive. MS. James, he said, looking at my business card. I am not familiar with your firm. We are new to the region. I lied smoothly. We specialize in distressed asset acquisition and high-risk debt mitigation. Pym stiffened. Distressed assets. We are a very healthy institution. I am sure you are, I said, leaning forward. I have done my due diligence on the local market. I know you hold a significant portion of the personal debt for several high net worth individuals in the manufacturing sector, specifically unsecured personal lines of credit that are being used to float operating costs. I did not say Graham's name. I did not have to. Pim's eyes flickered. He knew exactly who I was talking about. "We do not discuss client portfolios," he said, his voice tight. "Of course not," I said. "But let us speak hypothetically. If you held a note for, say, $2 million against an individual whose primary asset, his company's stock, was about to undergo a significant devaluation due to a potential city contract default, that note would become toxic on your books before the end of the quarter." Pim went pale. The rumors about the city contract were spreading faster than I thought. "Hypothetically," I continued, "if an investor were willing to purchase a tranche of that debt, let us say $500,000 of the riskiest unsecured portion at face value, effectively removing that risk from your balance sheet today, would you be interested?" Pim looked at me. He was doing the mental math. If Graham went under, the bank would lose everything. If he sold a piece of the debt to me now, he guaranteed a return on at least a portion of it. He could show his board that he was diversifying risk. "Why would you want to buy bad paper?" he asked suspiciously. "I like the yield," I said, keeping my face blank. "And I believe in the long-term recovery of American manufacturing. I'm willing to hold the bag for a while, but I have conditions." "What conditions?" "I want full assignment rights," I said. "I become the creditor of record for that portion, and I want the transfer to be silent. The debtor is not notified until the next billing cycle." Pim hesitated. It was irregular, but the fear in his eyes was stronger than his adherence to protocol. He was terrified of the upcoming bank audit. He needed to clean his books. "If you have the cash," Pim said slowly, "we might be able to structure a sale of the participation interest." "I have the cash," I said, "and I can wire it this afternoon." It took 3 days to finalize the paperwork. When it was done, Holly James Holdings, LLC owned a $500,000 slice of Graham Waverly's personal debt. It wasn't the whole pie, but it was enough to give me a seat at the table. More importantly, it gave me access to the loan agreement itself. I sat in my apartment that night reading the fine print of the document I had just purchased. It was a standard commercial loan agreement, but Graham in his arrogance had agreed to a specific covenant to get a lower interest rate. Clause 14B, the cross-default provision. In the event that the borrower fails to maintain a personal debt-to-income ratio of less than 40%, or if any other obligation of the borrower exceeding $100,000 is declared in default, this loan shall be immediately due and payable in full. My heart raced. Graham was using his personal assets to guarantee the company loans. He was cross-collateralized. If I could prove he was in default on one thing, I could trigger a domino effect that would make everything due at once. But I needed to be sure. I needed to see the whole picture. I went back to work at Redwood Compliance. My job, there was mundane checking boxes on forms, but it gave me access to the LexisNexis Risk Management database. It was a tool used by auditors to check the creditworthiness of vendors. I stayed late every night. I told my boss I was just catching up on filing. In reality, I was building a map. I mapped every loan, every lien, every credit line attached to the name Waverly, and that was when I saw it. A blip, a tremor in the web. Caleb Knox was moving money. I saw a series of inquiries on the credit report for Waverly Tool and Forge. They were from high-risk lenders, the kind of places that charged 20% interest and broke your kneecaps if you missed a payment. Predatory mezzanine financing. Caleb was trying to plug the holes. He was borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and then borrowing from Lucifer to pay Peter. But then something strange happened. I was monitoring the logs when I saw a query from Caleb's office. He was looking at the creditor list. He had noticed that First State Bank had sold a piece of the debt. He did not know who bought it. The bank had listed the buyer simply as HJH LLC. I imagined Caleb sitting in my father's office staring at that acronym HJH. It could mean anything. Harold Jones Holdings, Heavy Jupiter Hedge. He started making calls. I knew this because I saw the inquiries ripple out. He was calling other banks asking if anyone else was selling Waverly paper. He was getting paranoid. He smelled a rat, but he couldn't find the tail. "Who are you?" I whispered to the screen, imagining him sweating in his $3,000 suit. "Come on, Caleb. You are the genius. Figure it out." He couldn't because to him I was irrelevant. I was the emotional daughter who had taken her settlement money and run away to cry. The idea that I was the one buying the debt was so far outside his worldview that it didn't even register as a possibility. But I needed one more piece of ammunition. The cross-default provision required a trigger. I needed Graham to miss a payment or to violate a ratio. I looked at the calendar. It was almost the end of the quarter. The company needed to submit its compliance certificate to the primary lender. This certificate stated that the company was meeting all its financial ratios. If Graham signed that certificate and the numbers were fake, it was fraud. If he signed it and the numbers were real, he would be in default because the company was bleeding cash. It was a catch-22, and I knew exactly how to tighten the noose. I used my access at Redwood to pull the property tax records for the factory. Graham had deferred the property taxes. It was a small thing, a way to save cash flow. He hadn't paid the county tax bill for 6 months. I smiled. Unpaid taxes were a technical default under the loan agreement I now owned a piece of. It was small. It was petty. It was perfect. I drafted a formal letter, not as Holly, but as the legal representative of HJH LLC to Mr. Graham Waverly. Reference Loan Agreement 4922B. Notice of Covenant Violation. It has come to our attention that there is an outstanding tax lien against the collateralized property located at 400 Industrial Way under Section 14B of your loan agreement. Failure to keep all collateral free of encumbrances constitutes an event of default. You have 10 days to cure this default. Failure to do so will result in the immediate acceleration of the full principal amount. I did not send it yet. I printed it. I held the paper in my hand. It weighed nothing, but it felt heavier than a sledgehammer. This was not just a letter. It was a deadline. My father had spent my entire life using deadlines to control me. Be home by 10:00, graduate by 22, get promoted by 25. He used time as a weapon. He squeezed people until they popped. Now I held the stopwatch. I put the letter in a plain envelope. I did not mail it. I wanted to deliver it when the moment was right. I walked to the window of my apartment. Outside, the city of Crown Falls was sleeping. The factory was running the night shift. I could see the faint orange glow of the sodium lights in the distance. I wasn't just buying dead anymore. I was buying his panic. The phone rang. I stared at it. It was late, almost 11 at night. The number was blocked. I picked it up. "Hello, who is backing you?" It was Caleb. His voice was low, dangerous. He sounded like a man who had been pacing the floor for hours. "I am sorry, but you must have the wrong number," I said, my voice deliberately sleepy and confused. "This is Hully." "Don't play dumb, Hully," Caleb snapped. "I know you are up to something. I can feel it. You signed that settlement too easily. You walked away too quietly." It was her. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady. "Caleb, I am sleeping," I said. "I am living in a studio apartment and working a temp job. I don't know what HJH is. Is Dad okay?" "Dad is fine," Caleb hissed. "But if I find out you are messing with the financing, I will bury you. You have a non-compete. You have a non-disparagement. I will sue you into the ground." "I haven't said a word to anyone," I said truthfully. "I am just trying to survive. Good night, Caleb." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline. He was rattled. He was looking at shadows and seeing monsters. He was right to be afraid. I looked back at the printed letter on my desk. He thought I was messing with the financing. I wasn't messing with it. I was becoming it. I turned off the light. I had to wake up early tomorrow. I had to go to work at Redwood and file one more report. But the real work was done. The trap was set. The cheese was placed, and the rat was already sniffing around the edges. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of the dinner table. I dreamed of a boardroom, and in my dream, the chair at the head of the table was empty, waiting for someone who could afford to sit there. The invitation for the Waverly Foundation Autumn Garler arrived 3 days after I had sent the anonymous covenant violation letter. It was a heavy cream-colored card with gold leaf lettering, the kind that cost $15 a unit just to print. It was a summon, not an invitation. My father was throwing a party, not because he felt charitable, but because he was terrified. The rumors about the city contract were leaking like oil from a cracked engine block. He needed a show of force. He needed the mayor, the city council, and the local press to see the Waverley family standing strong, united, and philanthropic. He needed to wash the stain of financial instability away with vintage champagne and tax-deductible donations. And he needed me there as a prop. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my tiny studio apartment. I was wearing a black dress I had bought at a thrift store for $40. It was simple, elegant, and severe. I wore no jewelry. I pulled my hair back into a tight chignon. I looked like a penitent nun, which was exactly what they wanted. Caleb had called me the day before. "Wear something nice." "Holly," he had said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie, "your father wants to make a public gesture of reconciliation. It will look good for everyone if the prodigal daughter returns to the fold. Just smile, wave, and don't say anything stupid." "I will be there," I had replied. I arrived at the Crown Falls Country Club at 7:00. The valet parking lot was already full of luxury sedans and sports cars. I parked my dented sedan myself in the overflow lot and walked to the entrance. The ballroom was suffocating. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roast beef, and desperation. My father had pulled out all the stops. There were ice sculptures, a string quartet playing Mozart, and centerpieces made of white orchids that probably cost more than the severance packages of the 3 machinists he had fired last week. I scanned the room. I saw the mayor holding a martini, laughing at something Graham was saying. My father looked dashing in his tuxedo, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch to perfection. Caleb was hovering nearby, whispering into the ear of a local reporter. I walked to the check-in table. The girl with the clipboard ran her finger down the list. "Oh, MS. Waverley," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "You are at table 19. Table 19. I looked at the floor plan. The head table, table 1, was front and center. That was where my father, my stepmother, Caleb, and the mayor sat. The primary investor tables ringed the dance floor. Table 19 was in the back corner, directly next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. It was the exile table. It was where you put the distant cousins and the people you were obligated to invite but hoped would not show up. It was a calculated insult. They wanted me in the room to prove I existed, but they wanted me invisible enough to not cause trouble. I walked to my seat. The other people at the table were 2 junior suppliers and an elderly aunt I had not spoken to in 10 years. I sat down, keeping my back straight. I accepted a glass of water. I did not drink the wine. I needed a clear head. The evening dragged on. There were speeches about community, legacy, and the unbreakable spirit of Crown Falls. My father gave a toast that was so self-aggrandizing I almost laughed out loud. He talked about family values while his own daughter sat by the kitchen door smelling the fish being plated. Then it was Khaled's turn. He walked to the podium. The spotlight hit him reflecting off his perfectly gelled hair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caleb said, his voice smooth and amplified, "tonight is about unity. And speaking of unity, we are so touched to have Graham's daughter, Holly, with us tonight." The spotlight swung wildly across the room. It blinded me for a second before settling on my face. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I stared right back at him. "Holly," Caleb continued, his tone shifting into something patronizing, like an adult scolding a toddler. "We know it has been a difficult few months. Growing pains are hard. Rebellion is a natural part of finding oneself. But your father wants you to know that the door is always open for you to apologize and come home." The room went silent. It was an ambush. He was framing my firing as a teenage tantrum. He was calling me rebellious in front of the entire business community of Crown Falls. He was daring me to make a scene. If I yelled, I looked crazy. If I stayed silent, I looked submissive. "Why don't you stand up, Holly?" Caleb goad. "Show everyone that the Waverley family is ready to heal." He wanted me to stand up, bow my head, and accept the narrative that I was the problem. I placed my napkin on the table. I stood up, but before I could do anything, a chair scraped loudly against the parquet floor near the front of the room. It came from table 2, the table reserved for the company's oldest and most conservative investors. An old man stood up. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his white hair shocked up like a lion's mane. It was Elliot Crane. Elliot was a legend in Crown Falls. He had been the first person to invest in my grandfather's forge 50 years ago. He owned 12% of the voting stock, and he famously hated finance guys like Caleb. Elliot did not look at the stage. He turned his back on Graham and Caleb and began to walk, a slow, rhythmic thump step of his cane. He was walking toward the back of the room, toward me. The room held its breath. Graham stopped smiling. Caleb gripped the podium. Elliot Crane walked all the way to table 19. He stopped in front of me. He looked at my cheap dress, my pulled back hair, and the kitchen doors behind me. Then he looked at my face. "Holly," he grumbled. His voice was gravel and old iron. "Mr. Crane," I said softly. He extended a hand. It was calloused and shaking slightly with age. "It is good to see you," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. I was wondering where the brains of the operation had gone. "You are the only person in this family who knows the difference between a balance sheet and a blast furnace." The silence in the room changed. It shifted from awkward tension to stunned shock. Graham was moving now. He rushed down from the head table, his tuxedo tails flapping. "Elliot!" Graham called out, his laugh brittle and nervous. "Elliot, you must be confused. The VIP bar is open in the lounge. Let me walk you there. Holly is just sorting some things out." Graham tried to take Elliot's arm. Elliot snatched his arm away. He looked at my father with pure disgust. "I am not confused, Graham," Elliot snapped. "I am bored. I am bored of listening to your consultant talk about synergy. I came over here because I wanted to hear what Holly has to say." He turned back to me. "What do you have to say, Holly? You have been quiet for months." Graham's eyes widened. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear. He knew I knew things, but he didn't think I would dare say them here. Caleb was shouting into the microphone now, trying to regain control. "If everyone could please take their seats. The dessert course is being served." Nobody moved. Every eye in the room was on table 19. I looked at Elliot. I looked at my father. I did not need a microphone. I had projected my voice over the roar of stamping machines on the factory floor for 5 years. I knew how to pitch my voice so it carried. "I don't have a speech, Mr. Crane," I said, my voice clear and steady in the hush. "I just have a question." I turned my gaze to the mayor, then to the investors at the nearby tables. "If this company is as strong as my father says," I said, "and if we care so much about corporate ethics tonight, then perhaps someone should ask why the employee health benefits were cut on October 14th. I let the date hang there. October 14th, I repeated. The exact same day, a $5 million personal loan was signed by the executive chairman. The whisper started like a breeze and turned into a gale. Personal loan. October 14th. Graham went white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I wasn't done. "It is a strange coincidence," I said, looking straight at Caleb Knox, "that the money saved from the workers' insulin and heart medication matches the monthly interest payment on that loan almost to the penny." Caleb looked like he had been slapped. He stepped back from the podium, the feedback from the microphone screeching through the room. "That is a lie," Graham shouted, finding his voice. "She is lying. She is bitter because I fired her." "And I asked." I didn't shout. I didn't have to check the dates. It is all public record if you know where to look. I turned to Elliot Crane. "It was lovely to see you, Elliot, but I don't think I will stay for dessert. I have a feeling it is going to be hard to swallow." I picked up my purse. I walked past my father. He was trembling with rage, his hands clenched into fists, but he couldn't touch me. Not here, not in front of the mayor. I walked out of the ballroom. Behind me, the sound of polite society crumbling was sweeter than any music. I retrieved my car and drove home. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I had just lit a match in a room full of gasoline fumes. I got back to my apartment at 10:30. I poured myself a glass of tap water and sat down at my laptop. I knew there would be fallout. Callum would attack. He would sue. He would spin. But the seed was planted. Elliot Crane would ask questions. The mayor would ask questions. My email inbox chimed. It was a new message. The sender was Anonymous 88. No subject line. I opened it. It was a single attachment, a scanned PDF. I clicked it open. It was a copy of an internal wire transfer log from the Waverly Finance Department. It was dated 3 days ago. It showed a transfer of $200,000 from the Capital Improvement Fund money meant for fixing the factory roof into an account labeled KNX Consultant Services Retainer, and then a second transfer from KNX Consulting to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, and a third transfer from a different offshore entity back into Graham Waverly's personal account to cover a margin call on his stock portfolio. They were cycling the money. They were stealing from the company to pay the consultant who was kicking it back to the owner to keep him solvent. It was embezzlement. It was fraud. It was prison time. I stared at the screen. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe Dana Ree, the accountant. Maybe someone else who had heard the whispers. It didn't matter. Calath had looked at me at the Garler and realized I had the timeline. But he didn't know I had this. He thought I was playing checkers. He thought I was playing for an apology. I looked at the wire transfer log. Checkmate, I whispered. I saved the file to 3 different encrypted drives. I printed a copy and taped it under my mattress. The Garler was over. The party had ended. Now the demolition began. The meet was set for 3:00 in the morning at a 24-hour laundromat on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that smelled of fabric softener and despair, where the fluorescent lights flickered with a rhythmic, headache-inducing buzz. I sat on a plastic bench watching a load of towels tumble in dryer number 4. I did not have any laundry. I just had a burning need to know who Anonymous 88 was. At 3:10, the blast door pushed open. It wasn't a corporate spy. It wasn't a rival executive. It was Dana Ree. Dana was a junior accountant at Waverly Tool. She was 24, fresh out of college, and looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She was wearing a hoodie pulled up over her head, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her car keys. "Hully," she whispered, looking around at the empty rows of washing machines. "Oh my God, I shouldn't be here." "It is okay, Dina," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "You are safe. Why did you send me the wire logs?" Dana sat down next to me, leaving a foot of space between us. She was twisting a ring on her finger. "Because he is going to pin it on you," she said. The words came out in a rush, like water bursting through a dam. I frowned. "Pin what on me? I haven't worked there in 2 months." "That is what I thought," Dana said. "But yesterday, Khaled asked me to pull the archive logs for the ERP system. He wanted access to the approval timestamps for the last 3 quarters. He made me unlock the admin privileges." She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Holly, I saw him logging in. He wasn't using his ID. He was using yours." The air in the laundromat suddenly felt very cold. "My access was revoked," I said, "on the night I was fired. He reactivated it locally." Dana explained. "He is going back into the records. He is modifying the approval metadata on the bad loans and the benefit cuts. He is changing the user tag from Executive Committee to H. Waverly. He is building the digital paper trail that makes it look like you authorized the financial mismanagement before you left." I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't enough to fire me. It wasn't enough to humiliate me. Khaled Knox intended to send me to prison. He was setting me up to be the fall guy for the inevitable collapse. When the auditors came, he would point to the system and say, "Look, the daughter did it. That is why we had to fire her." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If he catches you, you lose your job." "Because I found out who he is," Dana said. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded flash drive. She pressed it into my hand. "I did a background check on him. A real one, not the sanitized bio on his website." "What is he?" "He is a grim reaper, Ollie. He worked for a fund in Ohio 5 years ago called Stratus Capital. They specialize in distressed asset stripping. He goes into family companies, loads them with debt, transfers the liquid cash to shell companies as consulting fees, and then bankrupts the original business to sell the real estate. He has been sued 4 times for predatory restructuring, civil suits, yes, settled out of court. Sealed records, but I found a deposition transcript on a legal forum. It is all in there." She stood up abruptly. "I have to go. If my key card swipes into the building late tomorrow, he will know." "Daner," I said, grabbing her wrist gently. "You are brave." "Thank you." "I am not brave," she said, pulling away. "I am just not a criminal, and I don't want to go to jail for him." She ran out into the night. I sat there for another 10 minutes, gripping the flash drive. The dryer buzzed, signaling the end of the cycle. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the house of the contingency lawyer I had retained, a man named Marcus Vance, who operated out of a converted townhouse. I woke him up at 4 in the morning. "This is not a civil dispute anymore," I told him as we sat in his kitchen, the flash drive plugged into his air-gapped laptop. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud." Marcus reviewed the files Daner had provided. He looked at the deposition from Ohio. He looked at the wire logs. "We need a firewall," Marcus said, rubbing his face. "We need to log this evidence with a third party immediately to establish a timeline. If Caleb changes the metadata tomorrow, we need proof that we had this data today, and we need to file for whistleblower protection for your source." "Do it," I said. "Lock it down." But as Marcus worked, I started reading the other files on the drive documents Daner had scraped from the shared server before she fled. There was a folder labeled Pension Fund Strategy. I opened it. It was a memo from Caleb to my father dated 2 weeks before the dinner where I was fired. Subject: collateralization of defined benefit plan. "Graham, in order to secure the mezzanine financing, we need to pledge the employee pension fund as a secondary guarantee. The current trustee structure requires dual signatures, yours and the VP of Operations. Based on previous interactions, Hully will not sign this. Her fiduciary stance is too conservative. Recommendation: remove the obstacle to facilitate the pledge." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The dinner, the argument about health benefits, the accusation of disrespect. It was all theater. My father hadn't fired me because I embarrassed him. He hadn't fired me because I was ungrateful. He fired me because I was the legal guardian of the workers' retirement money. As long as I was the vice president of operations, my signature was required to use that money as collateral for his loans. He knew I would never let him gamble with the workers' future. So he manufactured a fight, provoked me into speaking out, and used it as an excuse to remove me so he could steal the pension fund. He didn't hate me. He just viewed me as a compliance issue to be resolved. I closed the laptop. A cold, hard stone settled in my gut. It replaced the last lingering bits of sadness I had felt for the loss of my family. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, looking up from his notes. "I am fine," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, mechanical, hollow. "I just realized that I have been bringing a knife to a gunfight. I need to change weapons." I spent the next 3 days in a fever state of preparation. I wasn't just building a defense anymore. I was building a takeover. I drafted a buyout offer, but it wasn't the standard corporate letter. It was a list of demands masquerading as a financial transaction. Condition 1, immediate resignation of Graham Waverly as chairman. Condition 2, termination of all contracts with Knox Consulting and a forensic audit of all fees paid to date. Condition 3, immediate reinstatement of the defined benefit pension plan and the health savings match. Condition 4, retention of the current workforce for a minimum of 24 months. I calculated the numbers with the debt I had already purchased and the involuntary separation clause I had triggered. I had the legal standing to force this vote, but I needed to be sure the board would back me. I sent copies of the Ohio deposition regarding Caleb's past to 3 key board members. I didn't send it from me. I sent it in plain brown envelopes with no return address, just information. Seeds of doubt planted in fertile ground. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was my father. I stared at the screen. He hadn't called me once in months. Not when I was evicted. Not when I was job hunting. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Hello, Hully." Graham's voice came through the line. It was warm. It was the voice he used when he wanted to borrow money from investors. It was the good dad voice. "How are you, honey?" "I am busy, Dad." I said. "I am at work." I know," he said soothingly. "Look, I have been thinking the Garla It was unfortunate. Emotions were high. Caleb can be a bit aggressive in his PR approach. He was throwing Caleb under the bus. He sensed the wind changing. "I miss you, Hully," Graham said. "Your room is still here. Your car is in the garage. I was thinking maybe we were too hasty. Why don't you come home? We can reinstate your allowance. Maybe find a role for you in the charitable foundation. Something low stress." He was offering me a golden cage. He wanted me back under his roof where he could control me, where he could stop me from digging. "I don't need an allowance, Dad," I said. "Everyone needs help," he pressed. "You are living in a dump, Holly, I know. I had someone drive by. It breaks my heart. Let me fix it. Let me give you your life back." I gripped the phone. "You can't give me my life back," I said, "because you didn't take it. You just took my money. Don't be stubborn." His voice hardened slightly. "I am offering you a truce. Take it. Come back to the family." I saw the memo. "Dad," I said. Silence. Long, heavy silence. "What memo?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "The pension fund strategy," I said. "I know you didn't fire me for disrespect. You fired me because I was the only thing standing between you and the employees' retirement money. You sold them out to save your own skin. You don't understand business," he snapped, the mask falling away completely. "It is asset leverage. It is standard practice. It is theft," I corrected. "And it is over." "You have nothing," Graham shouted. "You are a temp clerk. You are nobody." "I am not nobody," I said, calm as a frozen lake. "I am a creditor. But I don't want your house, Dad. I don't want your money. I don't want your apology. I want you to stop hurting people. And since you won't stop willingly, I am going to make you stop. Holly, listen to me." "No," I said, "you listen. Check your email in 5 minutes." I hung up. I opened my laptop. I had the email drafted and ready. It was a formal notification of a special shareholder meeting to vote on a change of control triggered by the cross-default provision and the buy-sell agreement. Attached was the buyout offer, and at the bottom in the signature block it didn't say Holly Waverly daughter. It said Holly James Managing Partner, Holly James Holdings LLC. I hit send. I imagined the notification popping up on his screen in the mahogany library. I imagined the color draining from his face as he realized that the HJH LLC that had been buying his debt wasn't a hedge fund in New York. It was the girl he had kicked out of the dining room. I sat back in my chair. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, weary focus. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Daner, for the machinists, for the legacy my grandfather built and my father destroyed. The elevator had dropped. We had hit the bottom. Now the only way out was to climb over the wreckage. The war for Waverly Tool and Forge did not stay in the shadows. Following my email revealing my identity as the creditor behind HJH LLC, my father decided to burn the village to save the castle. He went to the press for 3 days. I could not turn on the television or open a browser without seeing my own face. It was an old photo, one taken at my college graduation where I looked young and naive, juxtaposed next to headlines that screamed betrayal. Daughter of local industry titan accused of corporate blackmail. The Waverly feud. How a disgruntled Aries is holding a family legacy hostage. They painted a masterpiece of fiction. In their version of the story, I was the spoiled, incompetent daughter who had been fired for negligence and was now using a shell company to extort her aging, benevolent father. They did not mention the debt. They did not mention the cut benefits. They only mentioned that I was attacking the family. I sat in my lawyer's office watching a clip of Caleb Knox on the local morning news. "It is tragic, really," Caleb was saying, shaking his head with practiced sorrow. "Graham has given her everything, and now she is threatening to bankrupt the company just to get a payout. We are calling it what it is, financial pay trade." Marcus, my lawyer, paused the video. "They are trying to go you Hully. They want you to sue for legal. If you sue, you open yourself up to discovery and they will drag the process out for 2 years while they drain the company accounts." "I know," I said. I was drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "They want me to get emotional. They want me to scream. What do you want to do?" "I want to finish the game," I said. The next move came from them, exactly as I had predicted. Caleb, in his arrogance, convinced my father that the only way to stop me was to cut my legs off completely. They sent a legal notice invoking the bad faith actor clause of the corporate bylaws. It was a nuclear option. It stated that because I was acting against the interests of the company, the board had the right to forcefully liquidate any remaining residual claims I had to the family trust or future dividends. Basically, they were trying to erase my name from the history books. But Caleb had made a fatal error. He was playing by the rules of modern corporate rating. He had forgotten the rules of the founder, my grandfather. The meeting was called for a Thursday morning. It was not a public shareholder meeting. It was a closed-door emergency session of the board of directors. I walked into the Waverly conference room at 10:00 sharp. Marcus walked beside me carrying a briefcase that contained the paperwork we had prepared weeks ago. The room was cold. The air conditioning was blasting, or maybe it was just the reception. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked terrible. His skin was gray and there were tremors in his hands that he was trying to hide by gripping his pen. Caleb sat next to him looking like a coiled snake. The rest of the board was there. Elliot Crane sat at the far end, his face unreadable. The other four members, two bankers and two old friends of my father, looked at the table, refusing to make eye contact with me. "You have some nerve showing up here," Graham said. His voice was raspy. "After what you have done in the papers." "You bought the ads, Dad," I said, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. "I just read them." "Let us make this quick," Caleb interrupted. He slid a document across the polished wood. "This is a formal notification of forced liquidation. The board has voted. We are exercising our right to remove a hostile actor. You are being cashed out, wholly completely. You take the check, you sign the release, and HJH LLC drops its claim on the debt. If you don't, we sue you for Tarkius interference and corporate espionage." I looked at the document. It was aggressive, it was mean, and it was the final nail in their coffin. "You are forcing a sale?" I asked, looking at the board members. "You are all in agreement. You are stating on the record that you are compelling a family member to divest their interest against their will." "We are," one of the bankers said, his voice thin. "It is necessary for stability." I looked at Marcus. He nodded. "Thank you," I said, "by formally invoking the forced liquidation clause against a family member. You have just activated the Buyout trigger in Appendix B of the 1985 Charter." Caleb laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. "We went over this. Ollie, you signed the settlement 6 weeks ago. You waive your rights." "I signed the settlement," I corrected him, "but, if you recall, I crossed out the voluntary line and signed the involuntary separation line, and I included a note that all terms must adhere to the original company bylaws." Marcus opened his briefcase and produced a single yellowed piece of paper. It was a copy of the original charter. According to the founder's bylaws, Marcus read, his voice projecting clearly, "If the board attempts to force the buyout of a direct heir during a period where the company's debt-to-equity ratio exceeds 4:1, the heir has the right of first refusal to purchase the controlling interest at the current valuation to prevent asset stripping." Caleb's smile vanished. He snatched the paper. "This is archaic." Caleb sputtered. This doesn't apply. We have a new operating agreement which explicitly states that it does not supersede the founders' original protections regarding family lineage." Marcus countered. "You missed betting your due diligence, Mr. Knox. You were too busy moving money to the Cayman Islands." The room went deathly silent. My father stood up. "What did you say?" "I am not here to destroy the company, Dad," I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. "I am here to save it from him and from you. You can't buy us out." Graham sneered. "You don't have the capital. You are living in a studio apartment. You are bluffing." "I am not bluffing," I said. "I have already purchased 20% of your personal debt. I have the leverage." And regarding the capital for the buyout, I turned to Elliot Crane. Elliot cleared his throat. He tapped his cane on the floor. "I have reviewed Holly's proposal," Elliot said, his voice rumbling like thunder. "And I have reviewed the financials she provided regarding the consulting fees paid to Mr. Knox. I am backing her bid." "You're what?" Graham whispered. He looked like he had been shot. "Elliot, We have been friends for 40 years. That is why I am doing this, Graham. Elliot said sadly, because a friend doesn't let a friend drive off a cliff. You are broke, Graham. The company is hollow. You let this consultant gut the place while you played big shot at the country club. This is a conspiracy, Caleb shouted. He stood up, slamming his hands on the table. I will sue. I will tie this up in court for 10 years. You will never touch those shares. You can try, I said, but if you file a lawsuit, we will have to enter the discovery phase. And if we enter discovery, I will have to submit the evidence I have regarding the wire transfers. I pulled a thick envelope from my bag. I threw it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud. That contains the logs of the money laundering scheme you are running through the vendor accounts, I said, and the sworn affidavit of a whistleblower in the accounting department who watched you manipulate the server timestamps. Caleb looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. He knew exactly what was inside. If the city sees that, I continued, the municipal contract is voided immediately. The company goes bankrupt tomorrow and you, Caleb, go to federal prison. I looked at the board members. They were pale. They were realizing that they were sitting on a ticking bomb. So here is the choice. I said option A. We fight. I release the files. The company collapses. The investors lose everything. Caleb goes to jail. And Dad, you lose your reputation, your home, and your freedom. I paused. Option B. You accept my buyout offer. It is fair. It pays off the primary debt. It keeps the factory open. It reinstates the workers' benefits. And it allows Graham to retire with his dignity intact, keeping the title of founder. But with zero voting power, Caleb leaves today with nothing. Graham sank back into his chair. He looked small. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a frightened old man. You would send your own father to jail? He asked. His voice was trembling. I am trying to keep you out of it, Dad. I said, but you have to let go of the wheel. You crashed the car. You don't get to drive anymore. This is blackmail, Caleb hissed. No, I said blackmail is what you did when you threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't sign the settlement. This is just business. It is the exact same ruthless, cold calculation you taught me. Dad, I just learned it better than you thought I did. I stood up. I am not going to argue anymore. I am not going to beg. The board has the evidence. You have the terms. We need time to deliberate, one of the bankers said, wiping sweat from his forehead. You don't have time. I said, the next interest payment on the primary loan is due in 48 hours. If you don't have a restructuring plan in place by then, the bank seizes the assets. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the handle and turned back. My father was looking at the table. He wouldn't look at me. He was defeated, but his pride was still a wall between us. I will be waiting for your answer, I said. I walked out. I went back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't fear. It was the crash after the adrenaline. It was the heartbreaking realization that I had just held a knife to my father's throat to save him from himself. I drove back to my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, watching the city lights of Crown Falls. My phone remained silent. 1 hour passed. 2 hours. They were stalling. They were trying to find a loophole. They were probably calling every lawyer in the state, trying to find a way to wiggle out of the trap I had built. I knew my father. He would never admit defeat until the absolute last second. He would think he could charm his way out or bully his way out. I needed to close the door. I opened my laptop. I composed a new email. Subject: final notice to Graham Waverly, Caleb Knox, Board of Directors. I didn't write a long, emotional plea. I didn't rehash the legal arguments. They knew the law. They knew the stakes. I typed 9 words. 6 months. And done asking. Here's the offer. I attached the final binding buyout agreement. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. If they wanted to survive, they would sign. If they didn't, then the Waverly legacy would end tonight. And strangely, I was at peace with either outcome because for the first time in my life, the decision wasn't theirs. It was mine. The document I sent was 10 pages long, but only one paragraph mattered. It was the term sheet for the acquisition of Waverley Tool and forged by Holly James Holdings LLC. It was not a suggestion. It was not a draft for discussion. It was a loaded gun placed gently on the boardroom table. I sat in my makeshift office, a card table pushed against the window of my studio apartment, watching the sun rise over the skyline of Crown Falls. I had not slept. I was running on adrenaline and lukewarm coffee. The offer was simple. My LLC would absorb the toxic debt I had already purchased. I would refinance the remaining liabilities through a consortium led by Elliott Crane. I would inject a modest amount of working capital to stabilize the supply chain, but the price was not money. The price was power. Clause 4, Section A. Graham Waverley will immediately resign as chairman of the board and CEO. He will retain the title of founder emeritus, a non-executive role with no voting rights, no signatory power, and no access to company accounts. It was a castration of his authority. I was offering him a golden parachute, a ribbon to wear at parties, and a salary to keep up his country club dues. But I was taking away the one thing he actually cared about, his ability to say, "Do this and watch people jump." The response came at 9 in the morning. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was a direct email from my father. "Holly, this is a fantasy. You do not have the capital to execute this buyout. You are playing poker with empty pockets. I will not resign. I will not negotiate with a terrorist. If you do not withdraw this offer by noon, I will have security ban you from the premises permanently." He still didn't get it. He thought this was a standard hostile takeover where the aggressor needs to buy 51% of the stock at market value. He thought I needed $10 million in cash to beat him. He forgot the golden rule of corporate finance. Equity is an opinion. Debt is a fact. And I owned the facts. I didn't reply to his email. I picked up the phone and called Arthur Pye at First State Bank. "Mr. Pye," I said when he answered, "this is Holly James. As the holder of the participation interest in the Waverley Credit Facility, I am formally notifying you that the borrower has rejected a solvent restructuring plan." "I see," Pym said, his voice tight. "We received a copy of Mr. Waverley's rejection. He claims he is securing alternative financing. He is not. I said he is stalling. The covenant regarding the tax lien cure period expires in 72 hours. If he hasn't paid those taxes or accepted my buyout, which includes a provision to pay them, the loan is in default. At that point, as a creditor, I will vote to accelerate the debt." "If you accelerate," Pym said nervously, "the company goes into receivership. We all lose." "Exactly." I said, "so I suggest you call him. Tell him the bank supports the HJH offer. Tell him the bank prefers a change of management over a bankruptcy filing." "I will make the call," Pym said. I hung up. My father thought I was bluffing about the money, but I didn't need to buy his shares. I just needed to trigger the default. Once the company was in default, his shares were worth zero. I wasn't buying the house. I was foreclosing on the mortgage. But Caleb Knox was not going down without a fight. By noon, my alert started pinging. Caleb was frantic. He was burning up the phone lines, trying to find a white knight, an outside investor who would swoop in, pay off the debt, and keep Graham in charge, and keep Caleb on the payroll. I saw an inquiry hit the credit bureau from a firm called Blackwood Capital in Chicago. They were a high-risk lender, the kind of place that charged 20% interest and took a pound of flesh. Caleb was trying to replace the bank debt with predatory loans. He was willing to bleed the company dry just to survive another month. I could not let that happen. I opened my laptop. I had prepared for this. I drafted a formal document, Notice of Material Adverse Change and Pending Litigation. It was a standard disclosure form. It listed the whistleblower complaint, the evidence of wire fraud, and the pending default on the city contract. It was factual, dry, and terrifying to any legitimate investor. I sent it directly to the compliance officer at Blackwood Capital. I wasn't slandering the company. I was merely performing my civic duty by ensuring that a potential investor had full visibility of the risks. If they lent money without knowing about the fraud, they could sue by telling them I made them liable if they proceeded. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dana Ree. "Caleb is screaming in his office." Blackwood pulled the term sheet. They said the risk profile is radioactive. I exhaled. One door closed, but Graham was desperate. And a desperate man is dangerous. The clock was ticking. 72 hours until the tax lien default became official. 72 hours until the bank seized the accounts. I sent a second email to the board of directors. To the board, you have 72 hours. The deadline is Friday at 5 in the afternoon. Option A, you accept the HJH buyout. We recapitalize immediately. Operations continue. No public scandal. Option B, you support Graham. The loan defaults on Friday. The bank seizes assets on Monday. The whistleblower evidence regarding the consulting fees becomes public record in bankruptcy court. The city contract is voided. Choose. Wednesday passed in a blur of silence. The board was paralyzed. They were terrified of Graham, but they were more terrified of losing their own money. Thursday morning, the cracks began to show. I received a call from one of the junior board members, a man named Simmons who owned a chain of hardware stores. "Hully," he said, his voice hushed. "This is insane. Graham is tearing the place apart. He is shredding documents." "If he shreds documents," I said calmly, "he is committing a felony. Remind him of that." "He says you are bluffing," Simmons said. "He says you won't pull the trigger because it would destroy your grandfather's legacy. He is the one destroying the legacy." "Simmons," I said, "I am the salvage crew. Which side are you on?" "I don't know," he whispered. He is very convincing." Thursday afternoon, the pressure mounted. The factory floor was buzzing with rumors. The workers knew something was wrong. Suppliers were putting deliveries on hold. The lifeblood of the business was freezing up. Graham decided to make his final stand. He called an emergency meeting at the house for Thursday night, not a board meeting, a family council. He invited the board members, Caleb and his personal lawyer. He did not invite me, but I had eyes in the room. Elliot Crane was there, and Elliot had his phone on the table, face down on an open line. I sat in my apartment, listening to the muffled voices coming through my speaker. "She is a terrorist," Graham was shouting. I could hear the clink of glass. He was drinking. "She is trying to steal this company because she is jealous, because she couldn't cut it in the real world." "Graham, the bank is calling every hour," Simmons said. "They are threatening to freeze the operating account." "Let them call." Graham roared. "I built this company. I am Waverly Tool. It does not exist without me. We have to consider the offer," another voice said. It sounded like the lawyer. "The terms are not unreasonable. You keep the title. You keep the pension. I keep nothing if I don't have control." Graham slammed his hand on the table. "I will not be a figurehead in my own house." Then Khaled spoke up. His voice was smooth, oily. "We don't have to accept the offer," Khaled said. "We can counterattack. We can file an injunction against Hully for corporate sabotage. We claim that she tampered with the creditor relationships. We get a judge to freeze her LLC. That takes time," Simmons argued. "We don't have time. We don't need much time," Khaled said. "We just need enough to get past the Friday deadline. I have a draft here, a sworn statement from the board of directors." I heard the shuffle of paper. "What is this?" Elliot Crane asked. His voice was clear and close to the phone. "It is a declaration of unity," Khaled said. "It states that the board unanimously supports Graham Waverly, that we believe Holly James is acting in bad faith, and that her allegations of fraud are baseless slander manufactured by a disgruntled former employee. If we all sign this, we can show it to the judge tomorrow morning and get a restraining order against her buyout bid." My heart stopped. If they signed that, if the board went on record saying my evidence was fake, it would muddy the waters. A judge might pause everything, and in that pause, Caleb could destroy the evidence, hide the money, or find a shady lender. "Sign it," Graham commanded. "Pass it around, sign it, and we end this nonsense tonight." I held my breath. I gripped the edge of my desk. This was it. This was the moment where fear either won or lost. "I will sign it," Khaled said. "Scratch of a pen. Pass it to Simmons," Graham ordered. I heard the paper slide across the table. "Simmons," Graham said, "you have known me for 20 years. Sign the paper. Tell the world that my daughter is a liar." Silence. The static on the line hissed. "Simmons," Graham warned. "Don't make me ask twice." "Graham." Simmons said. His voice was shaking, but it was distinct. "I have known you for 20 years. That is true." "Then sign." "But I read the file she sent," Simmons said. "I saw the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. I saw the dates on the benefit cuts." "It is fake," Caleb shouted. "She forged it." "It is not fake," Simmons said quietly, "because I called the bank myself. The money left our account." "It went to you, Caleb." Simmons. Graham roared. "I can't sign this, Graham," Simmons said. "If I sign this, I am perjuring myself. I am an accessory to fraud. You are fired." Graham screamed. "Get out. You are off the board." "You can't fire me," Simmons said. "Not without a quorum. And you don't have a quorum." "What are you doing?" Graham demanded. "I am signing something else," Simmons said. I heard the sound of a pen moving on paper, but it wasn't the Declaration of Unity. "What is that?" Caleb asked sharply. "It is a proxy form," Simmons said. "I am assigning my voting rights for the Friday meeting to Holly James Holdings, LLC." The room exploded. "Traitor," Graham yelled. "Get out of my house." "I am leaving," Simmons said. "And Graham, you should take the offer, because if you don't, I am going to the district attorney on Monday morning." I heard a door slam. Then Elliot spoke up. "I think the meeting is adjourned. Graham, I will see you on Friday." I ended the call. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for 6 months. Simmons had flipped. The wall of silence had crumbled. Graham had tried to use the weight of family to crush me one last time. He tried to guilt them into lying for him, but he had forgotten that loyalty has a limit, and that limit is jail time. It was Thursday night. The deadline was Friday at 5. Graham had no investors. He had no bank support. And now he had lost control of his own board. He was alone in that big house with Khaled Knox, a consultant who was undoubtedly packing his bags right now, looking for the nearest exit before the ship went down. My phone pinged. It was an email from Khaled Knox. Subject: settlement discussion. "Ollie, perhaps we can find a middle ground. Let us discuss a severance package for my firm, and I can facilitate a transition." I deleted it without reading the rest. There would be no severance. There would be no middle ground. I typed a reply to Marcus, my lawyer. "Prepare the closing documents. We are going in tomorrow." I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked different tonight. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a map. And for the first time, I was the one holding the compass. I had given them 72 hours. They had wasted 71 of them trying to kill the messenger. Now they had 1 hour left to read the message. The endgame was here, and I wasn't bringing a lawyer to the final meeting. I was bringing the one thing my father couldn't argue with. I was bringing the truth. The Friday deadline arrived with a sky the color of bruised slate. The rain that had been threatening all week finally broke, hammering against the glass facade of the Waverly Tool and Forge headquarters. It was fitting weather for a funeral, which in a way this was. It was the funeral of an era. The special shareholder meeting was held in the main boardroom on the top floor. The press had been barred from the building, but they were swarming the lobby downstairs. I could feel their presence, a low-frequency hum of speculation and rumor that vibrated through the concrete floors. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know that the headline wasn't going to be bankruptcy. It was going to be revolution. I walked into the room at 4:55 in the afternoon. I was alone. I didn't bring Marcus, my lawyer. I didn't need him to hold my hand anymore. I was wearing the same charcoal suit I had worn to the pension fund office, the uniform of the person I had become a closer. The room was full. The entire board of directors was seated. At the head of the table sat my father, Graham Waverly. To his right was Khaled Knox. Graham looked terrible. His face was a map of sleepless nights, his eyes bloodshot and darting. But when he saw me enter, he straightened his spine. He adjusted his tie. He tried to summon the ghost of the man who had terrified subordinates for 40 years. "You are late," Graham said. His voice was brittle, trying for authority, but landing on exhaustion. "We were about to adjourn." "I am 5 minutes early." "Dad," I said, placing my briefcase on the opposite end of the table. "Check your watch. It might be running slow, just like your reaction time." "Watch your tone," Graham snapped. "You may have manipulated Simmons and you may have tricked the bank, but in this room, you are still just a former employee an insolent child who thinks she can sit at the grown-ups' table. He was trying to bait me. He wanted the angry daughter. He wanted the shouting match. I didn't give it to him. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I opened my briefcase. I am not here as your daughter, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I am here as the majority creditor of this institution, and I am here to collect. I slid 3 documents across the polished mahogany surface. They fanned out perfectly. Document 1, I said, the buyout offer from Holly James Holdings, LLC, fully financed, fully guaranteed. Document 2, I continued the certified copy of the founder's bylaws, specifically the buy-sell trigger regarding involuntary separation during a period of high leverage. And document 3, I finished pointing to the last paper, the certificate of debt assignment, proving that I own 20% of your personal liabilities and hold the controlling interest in the company's primary credit facility. Caleb Knox scoffed. He leaned back in his chair, finding boredom. We know what you have, Holly. We have seen the emails, but you are forgetting something to exercise the debt covenant. You need a material breach, and despite your little threats, we made the interest payment this morning. We are current. You can't touch us. He smiled. It was a smug, predatory smile. He thought he had won on a technicality. You are right, Caleb, I said. You made the interest payment, but you missed the fine print in the loan agreement regarding qualified expenditures. I pulled one last piece of paper from my folder. Section 8, Paragraph C. I recited from memory. Any expenditure exceeding $50,000 that is not directly related to operations or approved capital improvements constitutes a misappropriation of funds and triggers an immediate default. The room went quiet. The sound of the rain against the window seemed to get louder. Last week, I said, locking eyes with my father, you authorized a wire transfer of $200,000 to KNX Consulting. You labeled it retainer, but according to the invoices I obtained, KNX Consulting has provided no deliverables, no reports, and no hours billed for that period. Furthermore, that money was immediately routed to an offshore account. Graham went pale. He looked at Caleb. Caleb stopped smiling. That is a non-qualified expenditure, I said. It is embezzlement masquerading as a business expense, and because you used company funds to pay a personal kickback, you violated the covenant of the debt that I own. I stood up and placed my hands on the table. The loan is in default as of yesterday. I am not asking for the money back. I am exercising my right as the primary creditor to demand an immediate change of management to protect my collateral. I looked at the board members. They were staring at me with eat. They realized I wasn't threatening to sue. I was telling them that I already owned the building they were sitting in. The proposal is on the table, I said. Graham steps down. I take over as interim CEO. We recapitalize. We save the city contract. We save the workers' jobs, and if we refuse, a board member asked shakily, then I foreclose. I said, tonight I file the papers at 9 in the morning. The assets are frozen. The company dissolves, and the forensic accountants will have a field day with that wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. The board members looked at each other. The silent communication was deafening. They were calculating their own liability. They were realizing that Graham Waverly was no longer a leader. He was a liability. I moved to vote. Elliot Crane said from the side of the table. Seconded, said the man sitting next to him. You can't do this, Graham shouted. He stood up, knocking his chair over. I built this. I am the chairman, not anymore Graham, Elliot said softly. All in favor of the restructuring plan. Every hand in the room went up except for Graham's and Caleb's. Motion carries, Elliot said. Graham, you are relieved of signatory power effective immediately. Graham slumped back against the wall. He looked like a balloon that had been punctured. But Caleb wasn't done. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. Fine, Caleb spat. You want the sinking ship? Take it. I resign. My firm will expect the remainder of our contract paid out by Monday, or we will sue for breach. He turned to leave. Sit down, Caleb, I said. My voice cracked through the room like a whip. Caleb froze. I am not paying you a severance, I said, and you are not resigning. I picked up the remote control for the wall-mounted screen. I pressed a button. An image appeared on the screen. It was the whistleblower file Daner had given me, and next to it, the court records from Ohio regarding Stratus Capital and the predatory restructuring lawsuits. This is a formal motion to terminate the contract with Knox Consulting for cause, I said to the board, specifically for fraud, misrepresentation, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Caleb turned purple. You can't prove that I have the server logs, I said calmly. I have the timestamps where you tried to frame me, and I have the sworn affidavit of the accountant you tried to bully into helping you. I pointed to the door. You are fired. Caleb, security is waiting in the hall. If you try to take a laptop, a file, or even a stapler, I will have you arrested for corporate theft. The police are already in the lobby. Caleb looked at the board. Nobody looked back. He looked at Graham. Graham was staring at the floor, defeated. Caleb sneered at me. You think you won? You just bought a corpse. Get out, I said. He left. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the tension of a king losing his crown. The board members gathered their papers and left the room. They knew this was a family moment now. They knew they were just spectators to the final act. Finally, it was just me and my father. The rain lashed against the glass. The room was dim. Graham walked slowly to the table. He picked up the pen that was lying next to the transfer agreement. His hand was shaking. He looked old. For the first time, I saw the wrinkles, the gray skin, the fear. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. "Pon," he whispered, using the affectionate term he hadn't used since I was 10. "Did you do all this just to get back at me? Is this revenge?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had been my hero, then my boss, then my tormentor. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and deep, but I didn't let it sway me. "No, Dad," I said. My voice was soft, but it was steady. "Revenge is about hurting someone because you are angry. I am not angry anymore." Then he asked, "Why humiliate me? Why take it all? Because you were dangerous." I said, "You were hurting the people you were supposed to protect. You were hurting the workers. You were hurting the city. You were hurting yourself." I walked over to him. I gently pushed the paper closer to his hand. "I didn't do this to destroy you," I said. "I did this to disarm you. I did it so you can't use your power as a weapon anymore." Graham looked at the paper. He looked at the line marked Founder Emeritus. He realized in that moment that I was the only one who had actually told him the truth. Caleb had lied to him. The board had placated him. I was the only one who loved the company enough to stop him from killing it. He uncapped the pen. He signed his name, Graham Waverly. It was a shaky signature, not the bold scroll he usually used, but it was legal. He put the pen down. "It is done," he whispered. "Thank you," I said. I picked up the document. I checked the signature. The ink was still wet, glistening in the dim light. Graham turned and walked toward the private elevator. He didn't look back. He looked like a man walking into a long, quiet retirement. I stood alone at the head of the table. I placed my hand on the back of the leather chair, the chair I had been forbidden to sit in for 27 years. I didn't sit down. Not yet. I looked out the window at the factory complex below. The shift change whistle blew. I could see the workers walking to their cars. They didn't know it yet, but their pensions were safe. Their health benefits were coming back. The company was safe. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Daner. Did it work? I typed back, "We own the table." I picked up my briefcase. I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at the empty room, at the ghost of the dinner where this all started. "You cut me off for disrespect," I said to the empty air, my voice echoing slightly off the mahogany walls. 6 months later, I bought control to make sure this company is finally respected. I turned off the lights and walked out the door. The work was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Holly James and her battle for justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Please drop a comment below to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and hit that like button so we can share this story with even more people. Thanks for watching.